Hi, today we'll be talking about media. Media is an agent for transmitting information and entertainment around the world. It can be done through the internet, television, or local papers and national papers, and affects individuals and groups differently. To look at how it does affect groups, there's a few theories and models we would like to look at. This one is a passive model. It's called the hypodermic syringe model. It's also referred to as the magic bullet. It goes on the premise that we take media passively, we're not aware of it. And this particular model was considered to be used in Germany in the 1930s as a way of Nazis to spread their propaganda through television, films, that kind of thing. Children are also believed to be susceptible to this model, as highlighted in the Bobo experiment, where a group of children witnessed a male striking a Bobo toy with a mallet quite aggressively. The same group of children were taken into a room with the Bobo toy and other toys and told that they were not allowed to use the toys. They all reacted in an aggressive manner, mimicking what the adult had done. This is actually called copycat behaviour. So this is a couple of examples of where this method has been used. Elizabeth Newton in 1994 believed that media violence is actually desensitised children, that any violence they've seen in media is actually desensitising them, and it's becoming the norm, and they're actually identifying more with perpetrators than they are the victims. Her research was that credible that it led to a 9 p.m. watershed and age verification on British films. There are some criticisms towards this passive method, and that's that there are many cases of social violence, and to blame media in its entirety is probably not right and unfair. And it goes on the premise that people are willingly misled. But there are other theories. These are active model theories. Clapper in 1960 said that we take our media in 3 different ways, so we're aware of it. One of them is selective exposure, so we choose what we want to watch. Selective perception, we decide whether we want to watch it or not. And then selective retention, so if we're interested, we store it. The two-step flow model here goes on the premise that there's opinion leaders. So this is a figurehead of a group that takes media on board and then distributes that media or his interpretation of media to the other group members, which is step 2. So basically, this is on the assumption that this is led on the assumption that everyone's part of a group. That isn't always the case, unfortunately. But there are other models that are active. The uses and gratification theory goes on the premise, this was done by Bloomer and Katz, and that we seek out media to fulfil our needs. So if we're looking for education, we go to Discovery Channel, we read books that are relevant. Entertainment, we watch sport. Personal identification, I watch a film that I feel I relate to the character in it. Or social interaction, watching soaps, so I've got something to talk about with my friends. Or escapism, just to escape from my everyday life, maybe a novel or a game. Criticisms of this theory are actually Marxism, saying that it's probably got not enough substantial research behind it, and they have their own model. They believe that media is displayed and contains ideological agendas through the drip-drip effect. Through the drip-drip effect. And they want the audience, us and everyone else in the world, to share their views, so they become media owners and achieve dominance over media. So we see their ways. Media ownership. There are a couple of media ownerships. There's 2 forms of media ownership which we're going to look at now. So there's public ownership, which is not funded, which is funded by taxpayers and TV licenses, that kind of thing. It doesn't really require money, so it tends to be unbiased. And then you have privately owned media, which tends to be owned by large corporations that produce media to make a profit, which allows for agendas and ideologies to be spread. There is concentration in ownership of media, which is a growing trend. In 1983, for example, 50 corporations in America owned the media. In 1992, there's only 22, which is less than half, which just highlights that a lot of the media is controlled by fewer people, these bigger companies and organisations. Concentration can be caused by a few things: companies buying out other companies abroad, going off into other areas like Virgin Media will go and get into insurance. Film companies going into publishing books, for example, so going into different types of media. There's also companies want total control over their product. So basically, if they produce a film, for example, they will then go on and buy all the cinema chains that will show that film. There's also synergy. This is when media is sold, such as stick with films. A film is made, they will create spin-off shows and cartoons based on that. And then there's technical convergence. This is when media companies link up with IT companies to show their product or their media, spread their media abroad across the world. Unfortunately, though, in media there is a lot of stereotyping, and this affects everybody. There's gender stereotyping, which is male and female. So males are perceived in the modern time as metrosexuals. They have to be in touch with their feelings, look after themselves physically, but they also have to be the manly, heroic worker that has always been perceived of old. Women are also victims of this, obviously. They're portrayed as beautiful only into their looks, domestic housewives, that kind of thing. There are strides to change that with lead characters and females, such as the Hunger Games, Wonder Woman, this kind of thing, independent, strong women being portrayed in media. But there are more than just genders. There's also sexuality. It was non-existent. Homosexuality was non-existent in media for a long time, but nowadays, when it is portrayed, it's portrayed as camp, macho, or deviant, making them feel less of a man or overly emotional. This is changing also with the emergence of a lot of gay actors coming into film. Doctor Who, for example, has had several gay characters take the lead role. Ethnicity, Van Dyke 1991 did some research and stereotypes. It said there's 3 types of stereotypes in media, and that's ethnic minorities as criminals, as only 50% of media portraying black news was crime related and gang related. Ethnic minorities as a threat. So when you look at there's moral panic being spread by Muslims. If you look at Muslims in the paper today, it's all related to terrorism without looking at the further texts or looking at anything else but that. They're being stereotyped. And then ethnic minorities are unimportant. And Van Dyke also went on to research that black victims were rarely talked about in the news, where white lives were considered to be more important. Disabilities are also in this category. They are perceived as pitiful and pathetic, with charitable programs, documentaries highlighting this. Sinister and evil. So, if you watch any sort of James Bond film, for example, they have a disability, a scar, or something like this. Super cripple is a portrayal. It's where somebody has maybe lost their eyesight, but they're considered to have better hearing. And sexually abnormal, they don't have any kind of sense of sexuality, and also they're perceived as being unable to or unimportant in social working life. You don't see much of them working. But to conclude, it's hard to argue that media doesn't influence all of us in one way or another, and ideologies and messages are easily spread with the concentration of media through big companies. I believe that we should strive to take on our own perceptions of all media and be respectful for those that have been stereotyped inside and outside of media. Thank you for your time.